Welcome to episode 3 of How I Wish I Learned Music. In this episode, we'll be learning the basics of the major 6 diminished scale. That intro you just saw was from my dorm at NYU some years ago, and everything I played in that clip comes from the major 6 diminished scale. Everything you heard there was a pattern of borrowing notes between the major 6 chord and its related diminished chord, and just moving that pattern down in a sequence through the major 6 diminished scale. In this video, we're going to discuss specifically the F major 6 diminished scale. But the nice things about these shapes we're learning is that on guitar, once we learn a pattern in, say, F major 6 diminished scale, well, what if we want to play G major 6 diminished scale? We're just going to slide all that same stuff up. First, let's review how our major 6 diminished scale is built. First, we have our, in this case, F major 6 chord. And that consists of 4 notes, F, A, C, and D. Then, off the second note, the major second, we have a diminished chord. So that's going to be G, B flat, E flat, and E. Now, when we put those 2 chords together, it kind of sounds like this. Now I'd like to show you my favorite scale shapes on guitar for playing the major 6 diminished scale. Today we'll look at the F major 6 diminished scale. So let's find the lowest F note on our guitar. And that happens to be the 1st fret of the E string. So we will refer to these strings, as most people do, as the high E string is string 1, the B string here is string 2, the G string here is string 3, the D string here is string 4, the A string here is string 5, and the low E string here is string 6. So our lowest F note is on string 6, the 1st fret. Now, let's look at our scale shape we have. So, let's look at our scale shape. We have on the 6th string 1st fret, 3rd fret. Now we move to the 5th string. We have the open string, 1st fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret. Now on the 4th string, we're going to play open string, 2nd fret, and then the 3rd fret to get to the octave. So to review, we have 1, 3, open, 1, 3, 4, open, 2, 3. Now, that scale shape starting on the low E string, if we want to see it without open strings, let's look to the 13th fret, 1 octave higher than this F. And that's going to go 13, 15, 12, 13, 15, 16, 12, 13, 15. Next, let's look 1 octave higher. So, in our first scale shape, we went. Alright, let's move on to our next position, which is right here, the 3rd fret of the 4th string, which is 1 octave higher than this, and it's actually the same as the 13th fret we played here. So, it's going to be basically the same shape, except we have to remember on guitar the B string is tuned to a different interval, so we basically just have to slide everything up a fret. So here it's going to be 3, 5, 2, 3, 5, 6, 3, 5, 6. And in this position I actually like to play this note over here because I think it just falls nicer on the hand. So it goes 2, 5, 2, 3, 5, 2, 3, 5, 6. Alright, let's move to our next position. Here is another F note. The same note, the 8th fret on the 5th string. And actually that's going to be the same shape we saw here. So 8, 10, 7, 8, 10, 11, 7, 8, 10. Another shape I think is important to know is from this same note is right here. So we're going to play 8th fret on the 5th string again, 8, then up a string to 5, 7, 8, then 5, 6, 7, then 5, 6. So in all that's alright, and one last shape I will show you is once we get here, this octave, here it's going to be similar to this shape. We saw it over here, but like we said, we have to slide everything up on the B string. So we're going to have on the 3rd string, fret 10, 12, 10, 11, 13, 14, next string 10, 11, 12. So for the rest of this video, let's just focus on one scale shape so we can look at all the things we need to learn within this scale. So let's start with our pinky on the 8th fret of the 5th string here, and we'll play this shape. And we'll add a little bit of extra range to that, so we'll play up to the 5th, an octave higher. So that's our single notes. The next thing we need to learn to do with any scale is to play it in thirds. And what that means is we take a note, skip this note, and then take this note. So our first third looks like this. So the scale in thirds will look like this. To the octave. Now, something interesting you'll notice about the thirds is if you've ever learned your major scale in classical music theory, we only have 7 notes and it goes like this. So if you play thirds in that scale, it sounds like this. This third here is, we'll notice, is a minor third, as opposed to in most music schools major scale, we get a major third from the 4th. This minor third here, let's give an example. You know the song Creep by Radiohead? I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo, what the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. That note, they call it the minor 4 chord. That's one of those things, classical music theory, they kind of just explain away. They're like, well, it sounds nice when you do it like this. And that's part of our scale. Another thing worth noting is the third between the 5th and the 6th here. In classical music theory, we call this a major second. But in our scale, since we have these 3 frets in a row, this is a third in our scale. So we go. And Barry would call this a diminished third, which is sort of poking fun at classical music when they'll call a minor 7th, if you in a chord bring it down, they call it a diminished 7th. And that's why we call this chord that we learned about last episode a fully diminished 7th chord. That's why we call this a diminished chord, because they're saying, well, this minor 7th, sometimes it's diminished. So in our scale, we call this the diminished third. That is right part of our major 6 chord. So if we play our F major 6 chord right here, that's that diminished third in our theory. Now that we know our thirds in the F major 6 diminished scale, we need to learn our triads. So a triad is basically like taking 2 thirds and combining them. So we're going to take a note, skip a note, take a note, skip a note, take a note. That's our first triad right here. An F major triad. Now when we alternate between triads in this scale, just like with the third, we're alternating between notes that are part of the F major 6 chord and notes that are part of the G diminished chord. So the triads will sound like this. Next, we need to learn what Barry called chords. And what Barry called chords are 4 notes. So in classical music theory, they'll call, I think, any 3 or more notes are a chord. So this triad is a chord. But in our theory, when we say chord, we mean 4 notes, because our scales of chords consist of 2 different chords that each have 4 notes in them. To get a chord, we take a note, skip a note, take a note, skip a note, take a note, skip a note, take a note. So our first chord is, now the chords in this little octave here go. Now we should know our single notes, our thirds, our triads, our chords. If you're new to playing guitar, that's going to take you a while to learn. That's going to give you a lot of stuff to practice, but it's so important that you learn it right away. Now, let's move into a practical example. And I'm going to use one of the greatest melodies of all time. Barry Harris liked to use great phrases from Bud Powell, another piano player, or Chopin sometimes. I have him in the thumbnails because I love him. He's basically a jazz musician. He was doing all this stuff. Barry would take a phrase from Bud Powell or Chopin, and he would move it through every possible position in his scale of chords. So I'm going to show you an example of that using one of my favorite melodies. M-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E. Lastly, I want to quickly talk about why the major 6 diminished scale can also replace the natural minor scale in your thinking, if you know traditional music theory. So a lot of you will know that the major scale and the natural minor scale contain the same notes. It's just, are we starting on this note or this note? So in our world, we're going to think of the natural minor scale as the major 6 diminished scale, just starting from the 6th note. 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sharp 5, 6. Now, because we add this extra note, we're getting that nice resolution right back into the minor. So when we're going to major, we have that resolution. When we're going to the minor, we have also that resolution. In classical music theory, in classical music, you'll hear something like this a lot. The minor chord to the dominant 7th chord on its 5th to the minor chord. And when this note gets introduced there, they kind of cope and they say, well, that's called the harmonic minor scale, which goes like this. But if you listen to classical music, you listen to Chopin, something like that, he's always using this note and then using this note to resolve, sort of throughout the song. So they'll be like, oh, he's switching between the natural minor scale and the harmonic minor scale. To us, we know he's playing with the major 6 diminished scale, and that's just one of the off notes from the diminished chord. And I'll touch on that more when we come to our first episode about playing chords, multiple voices at once in this scale. All right, one last time, our major 6 diminished scale, starting on F this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sharp 5, 6, 7, 1. And the reason we call this sharp 5 as opposed to going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is basically for backwards compatibility with traditional music theory. If you talk to other musicians, they're going to call that interval a major 6. So we don't want to call this the 6th. And they'll even call this in their chords, they'll call it a sharp 5. So if we have to call it something, it's a little bit of backwards compatibility. I kind of see it like English. We could create a constructed language that's more efficient to speak and saves time and is truly more logical. But English is just so ingrained in everyone that it lives on. It changes over time. It lives on. We're going to keep using the name of these scales degrees like classical music does. But it doesn't really matter what we call the scale degrees because we know where they come from and why we're using them differently. And maybe, like how English evolves over time, musicians will start to call them differently over time. Thank you, and join me in episode 4 to learn about the minor 6 diminished scale in single notes.